Good morning. Oh, come on. So I was told that Charlotte, Southern hospitality, that sort of stuff. So let's try that one more time. Good morning. Much better. Would all the people all the way in the back come forward? Come forward. Come closer, please. Otherwise, I will make fun of you during my entire talk. Come on, come sit down. Come enjoy. So, good morning. My name is David Blank Edelman. You've seen me up here before doing this sort of a athletic Ignite thing. Now we have a whole talk to get to know each other and to sort of stretch out, so that should be pretty fun. I come from Boston, but actually the company that I work for is called SRE. It's in San Francisco, and we make this awesome container management platform that DevOps tend to love because it's got a policy engine in the middle and does all sorts of great hybrid and multi-cloud stuff, and you'd probably love it. So I'd recommend you check it out at some point. But I'm not actually here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about lessons learned from a parallel universe, or the other thing I could say is SRE for DevOps. So the question I guess you might be asking yourself is, what's SRE? Would you be so kind as to raise your hand if you know what SRE is? Okay. If you do not know what SRE is, please raise your hand. Okay, that makes me really happy because it means I can say something you don't already know, and that will be awesome. So SRE stands for Site Reliability Engineering, and it is what was created, I think about 13 years ago back at Google when they were trying to figure out how are they going to run this massively scaled organization. There's stuff going on back there that you want to talk about. So what I want to do is I want to talk about why they called it site reliability, and then I'm also going to let you know that this is not just all about Google, and we'll get to that in a moment. So does anybody recognize what this is? Raise your hand if you know what this is. Baruch, what do you think? Good, close. But what? Say again? Oh. Oh, you're making me very unhappy. Well, this, in case you're curious, is what happens. Here, let me do this. Does this make it? Is this a little bit better? This is what happens when your application errors out, right, and gives you sort of the white screen of death, right? And I'm not going to leave this little stack trace up too long because I know that there's some people starting to twitch in the. So we'll go back to this. Okay, so the idea here is that at some point they realized the key thing that you might want to optimize for in your operations is reliability. Because you can have an app with all the features in the world, but if it in fact doesn't run or isn't running or isn't available to the people that are using it, it's worthless. So they are all about reliability, and they're all about engineering to take failure out of the system. So the thing that they're trying to deal with is the same thing that DevOps is dealing with, which is this sort of pull between this group of people whose job it is to write software, to make new features, to change things, to bring the latest to you. And this other group of people over here whose job it is to operationalize that, make sure it's running, make sure it's stable, make sure that it never goes down, right? And there's this tension, right? This is the tension that we feel in DevOps, which is how do I get the two people to play nice, right? And that's kind of one of like the fundamental tension that brings you all sitting in this room here right now. So, and you probably are familiar with this problem, right? Right? Which is a similar problem that they have to deal with. Or I think it's pretty safe to say that you understand very deeply that as you start to scale your organization, and even if you're working with a small organization, that it is not possible to scale using people. You cannot appropriately hire enough people to keep going and to keep building out. And these were the sort of things that they were trying to deal with. Now, I want to get a couple of things out of the way just so you feel a little bit better. I understand that everybody in this room is sitting here going, I have so many things that I have to pay attention to. I am trying to keep up with the latest of everything, and sometimes it can feel a little bit like waving, not drowning, or drowning, not waving, I guess. And so what I want to tell you is the stuff that I'm going to be talking about here is not meant to say, throw out all your other knowledge, I'm supplanting all that. This is maybe to give you a few tips that might be interesting to you about how another group that has the same challenges that you do has been handling this in some of the organizations that have done some smart stuff, in my opinion. I have to get some other stuff out of the way. This here diagram, right, gets used a lot and overused because there's some notion, in fact, it was used very similar, the colloquial version that's got used in some other speaker's deck recently, because there's some notion like over here on this side is the sysadmin, but we have evolved, and over here is the DevOps, right? Is the DevOps, right? Or whatever. And this used to be the case as DevOps was trying to say who they were. There was some sort of, hey, we've evolved. What I want to tell you that I'm not here to tell you that over here is DevOps and over here is SRE, okay? It is not the case that one is further evolved from the other. They're just people working on the same challenges in sort of parallel. And that's the thing that I think is important to know, because it's very easy to sort of have this chip on your shoulder about any of these things. And anybody who tells you that SREs are better than DevOps, or DevOps are better than SREs, or both of you are better than, I don't know, the people that teach your kids, is wrong, right? Just blatantly wrong. So, okay, are we ready? Okay, that is weak. So if you're that ready, then I don't know whether we should continue. But I'm going to continue. So what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about what DevOps is, because I feel that the people in this room are here at our conference. They probably know that. So let's talk a little bit about where site reliability engineering comes from. So this is a book, and I just want to state a couple of biases. I did tech review this book, and my name is somewhere on the you should buy this book on the cover. But I think it's really cool. This is a book that was recently published by a bunch of authors from Google about what Google does for site reliability. And you should read it not because you want to be Google, but because they have thought some cool things and some smart stuff. And if you can get past the little bit of Google is awesome and only things, these things are so awesome we couldn't have invented it anywhere else, which is just the marketing stuff that was not written by the authors, there's some interesting stuff in that book. So, but I think it's really kind of important to know that the discussion that I'm going to talk to you about is not just about Google, right? I'm not trying to tell you, the actual blurb in that book that I gave is something along the lines of, it used to be the case that Google would go to these conferences, and it would be like what happens when the Gila monster expert shows up at the reptile show, right? Everyone would go, they'd listen to the Gila monster, they'd be like, oh, cool, that's really cool, and then they'd go back to their geckos, and they wouldn't have anything to do with this. What I'm hoping to tell you is that there's some things here that will be immediately useful to you. So my best explanation of what SRE is the one that I heard given by this guy down here on the bottom, who is a gentleman who actually, his name is Ben Traynor at Google. He was the one who started the group those many years ago. This is from the first keynote from a conference that I helped start, called SRECon, that's going on now. It's going on in 3 different places in the world. This first keynote laid out what I thought was a really good, clear, and cogent understanding of what he thought SRE was. And so what I'm going to do is take you a little bit through his list. So this is a dramatic recreation of the slide that he showed. It's dramatic because I didn't get his deck from him. It's a recreation, I guess, for that reason also. I'm not expecting you to read all these things right now because we're going to go through bits and pieces of it together, okay? So don't worry about that. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about this part up here, which says have an SLA for your service. People know what an SLA is. Somebody here help me with that acronym? Service level agreement. Very good. They also call them service level objectives there. So the theory goes like this, is that you should sit down with the people who you are supporting, and between the two of you, your group and whoever is working this, you should hammer out an agreement for what expected level of reliability is your application should have. Because quite frankly, most of the applications that we run don't have to be running 100% of the time. Like if we're all honest with ourselves, it's okay to have 5 minutes of downtime a year, or 10 minutes, or an hour, that sort of stuff. Now the things that fly the planes, not so much. The stuff in your pacemaker, not so much. But that application that computes your budget, maybe it can be down a little bit. So that's a key piece of information. How reliable do you actually need this to be? And when you look at that, you say, oh, I need it to be up 80% of the time, and then you have 20% of the time left over, right? And we're going to talk about what that 20% represents. So you go ahead and you measure your performance against the SLA, and then you use something they call an error budget. An error budget is that 20% where you said, okay, it's okay for my application to be down 20% of the time. I'm using rough numbers because if we go 0.59 or something like that, it's a little harder to talk about. So the notion is that you attempt to figure out, well, how much slop do I have? How much reliability can can I give up? Because I've already said with you that it only has to be up 80% of the time. So here's a pretty picture. So you start off with some service level objective that says, okay, I have a service, it has to be up 80% of the time, therefore I have 20% left, okay? And then we all agree how we're going to measure reliability. Is it the application is running? Is it a certain amount of transactions per second? Is it this? Is it that? And we all agree what this is, and then we set up some monitoring that we both believe in. The developers, the development groups, and the operations group. And we just all agree on that, right? We set up whatever it is, whatever your monitoring software is, but there's an objective measure that we all look at and we can all see all the time. So then it comes time to possibly put your code out to production. So you look at the monitoring and you say, hey, have we in this quarter, let's say, been up 80% of the time? And if it is, awesome, I can launch my new version. That's totally fine. I can push a new version out to production. That'd be totally fine. But if in fact, for some reason, I have been down 20% of the time this quarter, no. We just agree that we are not going to push new versions. So what happens in that particular case is that there is this lovely incentive to make sure that your code is reliable, right? And if, in fact, you haven't made your 80% that time, then maybe the people that are writing that code are going to go back and figure out, well, why isn't it reliable? What is going on? What are the bugs that are causing this sort of stuff? So there is a reason to go back and do this. And so clearly you have to have sort of management buy into this sort of stuff, but it can be really useful because it means that there's sort of this objective measure about when is it okay to put new features out? When is it okay to run new versions? Like, we don't have to argue about that. We have the number. We know. Either you're in your budget or you're not. Okay, so here's another thing that I think is also kind of cool, that this is, again, a Google thing. First off, they tend to hire the same people, the people who do operations and the people who do development work, from the same pool of people. And people flop back and forth all the time if they want to. And then what they say is that if, in fact, there is excess operations load, i.e. if your systems are generating, I don't know, too many tickets or too many alerts or whatever, that sort of thing, then what happens is after a certain point, the tickets, instead of going to the operations group, start going to the developers, right? Instead of going to the people that are there. And what that does is that sets up this awesome system. The best way I can put it is the first time or maybe the second time that a developer is paged at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the morning is the last time that bug appears in production. Right? It's just a true thing, right? And so the notion is that you share this operational load, and then everybody has the incentive to build in something that allows you to make sure that the operational load associated with the system is good. Oh, and the other thing that they also do is they also say that the operational load for any one SRE should be no more than 50%. They should be spending no more of their time hunting alerts or chasing tickets or whatever that is. Because the idea is the people, and you people in this room understand this, that if you're going to make any progress at all in writing code, in building things that are going to make your environment better, you need to have time when you're not firefighting. If you're spending the entire time firefighting, you're never going to get ahead of yourself. And so they make it clear that there should be an operational load of 50%, and they're very clear about that. Okay, so here's an observation that I'd like to make about what I think is cool about SRE, and you can think about where you can bring this into your environment, which is you create these virtuous and reinforcing feedback loops, right? If there's too much operational load, well, the developers share some of that operational load, and they want to get that out of their life as well, right? Or stuff like that, and I think that's super important to know. Okay, so here's something that has shown up in the land of DevOps also that I'm really particularly pleased about, but I don't know if everybody here has that in their understanding, is the notion is that every major event in Google, Facebook, Twitter, you name it, has some sort of postmortem that takes place after that event, where they go over and try to figure out what happened during that event and what failed. And the key thing that's really important, and this is right from his slide, is that postmortems always are blameless, and we'll talk about that in a moment, and they focus on process and technology, not people. Not Bob or Susan screwed up, but what did we do wrong in our process such that Bob made the wrong decision or Susan made the wrong decision, right? What was wrong with our technology such that we didn't catch that beforehand? Not that this person sucks, but that our technology could be better and we could fix that. And to my mind, that's super important because, quite frankly, you can't fire your way to reliable. We have some notion in this country that says, well, such and such at the head of this screwed up, so we're going to fire them, right? But, that only goes so far. You can't, your product doesn't suddenly become more reliable if I just fire enough people, right? And there's no chance to fix it, right? And this is a key thing that I hope you go back and you talk about. So, but you're probably saying, oh, well, that's great, that's all Google, but what about sort of the rest of the SRE universe? Because the SRE concept is sort of spread around. And if you look at who else is sort of in the land of SREs, there's a lovely list of companies you may have heard of that hire SREs. And there may actually be some in this room today. Does anybody care to uncloak? Anybody call themselves an SRE in this room? Nobody? Well, someday you might be. So here's a bunch of companies. I don't have enough time to sort of talk about the differences in how SRE manifests in each company, so I'm going to just pull out one of them. I'm just going to pull out Facebook. Okay? Has anybody heard of the Book of Face? I'm one of the 14 people on the planet that don't actually have a Facebook account, but I've heard it's pretty cool. Yes? Anybody here on Facebook? Yes? Don't you ever wonder how it runs? Do you actually wonder who's behind the scenes? So this is my Facebook graphic because they wouldn't let me use Jack in terms of their stuff. So Facebook has what they call production engineers, and so I have had a long discussion with the person in charge of their production engineers. His name is Pedro. He is awesome. He is down there. He also has given the second keynote for SRECon the year after that sort of stuff, and so they have production engineers. And so production engineers are like SREs, but a little different. And here's the big blurb. I apologize for the big blah of text, but I will read it to you. Production engineers at Facebook are hybrid software system engineers who ensure that Facebook's services run smoothly and have the capacity for future growth. They are embedded in every one of Facebook's products and infrastructure teams and are core participants in every significant engineering effort underway in the company. Can anybody tell me what the important word is in that big blurb? Because that's kind of different. That's different than Google, by the way. Go ahead. Go pick a word. Embedded. Yeah, embedded. You're absolutely right. Yep. So it is, in fact, the case that look, I made it big in red. There you go. Okay. So one of the things that's interesting about them is, unlike Google, where there's sort of this central notion of SREs, they're really big on making sure that there's an SRE embedded in every major product team, and you sort of get one as part of that sort of stuff. So the thing that I think that's important to know about this is there's no one right way to build an SRE team. There are certainly wrong ways, and we can certainly talk about what the wrong ways would be to construct an SRE team, and I'm happy to talk about that later if you want. But there's no one right way. People are doing it different ways. And so, in case you were curious, there is approximately a 10-to-1 ratio in terms of developers to operations people who call themselves production engineers in Facebook. Piece of information I bet you were curious about. One of the things that's interesting about them is that a production engineer will either be on an 18-month, 24-month, or sometimes even 36-month tour of duty with a particular product team. Right? They stick around, and they are part of the product team for a long period of time. And they're not like a SWAT team. They don't rappel down the side of the building like, hot, 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 we have an operations thing, we need to help. They're also not like, hey, look, we have a production engineer, they'll do all the tickets. That's not the way it works at Facebook either, right? They are part of the team that are about this. And if you've heard of boot camp, which is the big thing, if you get hired at Facebook, everybody goes through boot camp. It's a sort of a indoctrination, let me say a nicer way. It's an educational experience in which you learn the Facebook way and how software gets developed. Production engineers also go through boot camp. And here's a really cool, important thing, so much so cool that I'm going to turn it red too. The leads for production engineering in Facebook report to the same exact person that is responsible for the engineering effort. And this, they say, is key. It is really important that people that are responsible for operations and the people that are responsible for building stuff point to the same person. Because otherwise, you have competing parts of an organization that have different needs that get reconciled through argument and discord versus one person is paying attention to both at once. And I think that's super important to know. And here's the thing that you should know, and hopefully this doesn't make you too sad, or maybe it makes you happy. In order to pull off, I think, SRE successfully, and this is my opinion, you need to have some sort of management support. You need management to say, yes, we think reliability is the key thing, and we are willing to take the hit on development velocity to make our thing more reliable. and that's super important. Okay, so the other thing that I think is kind of cool that they have is they try to break down their projects in terms of a maturity model, where they look at the maturity of both the software developers and the production engineers teams work. Like how well are they working together? How mature is the stuff they're putting out? How mature is the actual level of service that it's putting out there? Because they have different kinds, right? So they talk about stuff that's like, let me see if I get this right. That's like just basically released. Then there's the stuff that's ready to release. There's stuff that's in production, and then there's the step where they awesomeize it, is the term they use, believe it or not. Where the notion is, let's go back and take those 5% cases that weren't particularly performant, and let's go make everything awesome. And here's the other thing I think is really interesting that I don't see as much. One of the things that they take into account is how well are the software developers and the production engineers working together when they're trying to decide how mature a project is, right? And I like that. I really like the notion that somebody's paying attention to the people. Oh yeah, here are the steps. Sorry, bootstrap, build out, which is the actual building of the stuff. Then there's the initial deployment, in which you sort of think a little bit about scale, but not as much. And then finally you awesomize it. Not my turn? Okay. So my goal here in this particular talk was just to sort of get your sights on the idea of SRE. That's basically my big purpose, is that you might have a chance to pay attention to it if you haven't heard the term before, because if you go look at this stuff there, I really believe that SRE and DevOps have a lot to learn from each other, and I have a whole other talk called SRE versus DevOps Fight or Learn, because I think that they can learn stuff from each other. And I think it's a nice way to sort of enrich our practice as DevOps people here. And with that, I am more than happy to take a couple of questions. I'm trying to end right on time. So, questions? Stuff about SRE? So the question is, what qualities do we see for, I'll say SRE and NPE? So when I talk to the people that run these groups, they're looking for people who are smart. They're looking for people who are well-rounded and can look at a situation and understand everything down from what's going on in the kernel and up as necessary. For example, to have this notion that they can have a site. People who can think about distributed systems is really kind of important to them. What else would I say that's really? Oh, and you can't be a jerk, right? That's something that Pedro was telling me at Facebook. Like when they go to hire, like there are plenty of people who are super smart who are jerks, and they don't want any of them. They just don't want them because they recognize you can really, you can walk on water. Maybe that's not the right phrase to use here. But if you're a jerk and you can't work with other people, then you're not going to be successful in an environment that is trying to build stuff at this scale. And so that's a key thing. So if you want to be one of these people, work on your people skills, I'd say, among other things. Hope that answers your question. Other questions? Yes, sir.
You're talking about the sort of standard ratio that you see of like 1 to 10 SRE to developers. Is that, do you think that's just sort of, have you seen anyone experiment with like sort of 50-50 or like something like a larger percentage than that? Or
Yeah. So the question was, and then there was a response from the audience. Like you said that the standard ratio is 1 to 10. I want to be clear, that's just Facebook. Google is a little more reticent to tell me what the percentiles are. Ryan thinks that Amazon has said it's 1 to 5. And so your question was like, what about bigger or larger ratios? It kind of depends on what your product is and what you do for a living. Like if your job is if part of your company is to sell and be SREs, I think that's a lovely ratio. I think one of the key things about SRE is the notion that your job is to see what you can do to scale. Scale the machines you're running on, scale the organization, that sort of stuff. And finding the people that have these characteristics can be really hard. And so ideally, they want to be thinking about how they can leverage themselves as best as possible. So I would say that the 50-50 doesn't make as much sense to me because finding one. Now, in larger environments, smaller environments, yeah, you can in a startup, for sure the ratio is going to be off because there's only 3 people or 5 people or whatever, in that sort of stuff. I would like to answer any more questions, and I think that I have exactly one more question left. Or we could have some awkward silence, because I'm really down with that. Ready? Go. Okay, well, with that, I would just want to thank you for your attention. It's awesome to be here. Oh, and one last thing. I think there has been insufficient appreciation and applause for the organizers of this event. I have not felt that love as keenly as I really feel it's deserved. So would you do me a favor and at least not clap for me, but clap for them? Thank you very much.